It's home to some of the most consequential decisions in modern history. But the meetings that happen inside the White House Situation Room are rarely known by the American public. Well, until now. The Situation Room, the inside story of presidents in crisis, is a new book, bestseller by George Stephanopoulos. We sat down after his recent event at the Chicago Humanities Festival to talk more about it. I think a lot of people assume that the Situation Room has been around forever. You make it clear in the book, 12 administrations, started with JFK, and his goal was to have it be a watch center.
A watch center in the White House. Yeah, JFK set it up right after the Bay of Pigs, right after that disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion, because he was pretty pissed off. He was angry at the CIA, he was angry at the Joint Chiefs of Staff, because he felt they had given him bad information. So he wanted an independent source of information, intelligence and public information coming in to the White House and to his team in this watch center in the White House. It had actually been proposed to him 2 weeks before the Bay of Pigs, but he didn't act on it until afterwards, and they ended up building it very quickly after that. They built it in about 2 weeks at a cost of $30,000.
One of the things you write about, these questions that occur to all of us, but that the staffers actually have these strategic considerations, when to wake the president, when not to, and others. Talk a little bit about that strategy.
One of the biggest duties of the White House Situation Room duty officers is figuring out who they have to wake up when information comes into the White House. And they're manning, men and women now all through the night, 24/7, watching the entire world. And at any moment they have to decide, okay, is this plane that's coming across the sky, is it an actual threat, or is it just messed up transponders? The most chilling moment I came across in researching this book happened during the Carter presidency in June of 1980. Zbigniew Brzezinski was President Carter's national security advisor at the time, and he gets a call patched through the Situation Room from his military aide, William Odom, who says that there's an entire flotilla of Russian missiles heading towards the United States. You have 7 minutes to decide what to do. He takes it in, quickly says, okay, go triple check before I do anything else and call me right back. And in that minute, as he was waiting for the other call, he's thinking, oh my goodness, you know, is this the end of civilization? What am I going to tell the president? He chose not to wake his wife, who was sleeping right beside him, reasoning that it would be kinder if indeed the worst happened for her just to die in her sleep. As he was thinking about that, the second phone call came in from William Odom, false alarm. So he never had to call the president, but there are situations, not that extreme, but like that come through the White House Situation Room every night.
It was stunning to read, and you make it very clear in the book that the Situation Room actually is a reflection of each president's personality. Let's just walk through a couple. I want to put LBJ and Nixon together because polar opposites. LBJ's control of what he wanted, Nixon who wanted no part of the situation.
LBJ loved the Situation Room, spent hours there, moved his favorite chair down from the Oval Office into the Situation Room, and was on the phone to the Situation Room constantly, all through the night, looking for any scrap of information about Vietnam. But if John F. Kennedy chose to set up the Situation Room because he believed information is power, what we learned from Lyndon Johnson is that information isn't necessarily insight. All that data couldn't tell him how to win the war in Vietnam. In some ways, Richard Nixon reacted to the Johnson experience for one high-minded reason and one not so high-minded. He almost never went there. And part of the reason was that he was kind of a paranoid man, and he didn't trust the duty officers in the Situation Room. Thought they were part of what would now be called the deep state. Remember, he and Kissinger tapped the phones of some of their national security officials. But the other reason was one expressed to me by Henry Kissinger, who said that they didn't want us to come to the Situation Room syndrome. The idea that somehow the people can fall prey to, that you can control the world from that windowless room in the White House basement. That was the illusion that LBJ had. Nixon wasn't going to succumb to it.
Yeah, it not only fascinating, but I always thought, and people hear about it, you can't go in the Situation Room, leave your phones outside, right?
Yeah.
There's no, and yet you have, I'm going to move to Reagan, because after he was shot, you talk about the fact that Richard Allen brings in a tape recorder, puts it on the desk, records for history, and you made me think as I read that, shouldn't we be recording what happens in the Situation Room for history?
It's a very, very good question. You know, presidents from FDR through Nixon taped a lot of meetings, not often in the Situation Room, but taped a lot of meetings. Ever since the Nixon tapes, that's gone by the wayside, so people don't do that anymore. In part, they don't tape the phone calls that presidents have with foreign leaders, which is one of the main jobs of the Situation Room, is to set those up. I think there's actually some, beyond the reason I just said, I think there's another reason the presidents haven't started doing that. I think they kind of like the deniability of knowing that whatever they have is a memorandum of the conversation, not an exact transcript.
Under George W. Bush, of course, tragic September 11th. And I was literally stunned when I read that too, because you're thinking, the Situation Room is controlling it all. You write, actually, they tried to clear out the Situation Room for safety, and Condi Rice had to be escorted, literally lifted off the ground and taken out.
One of the most chilling moments, and actually inspiring moments in the history of the Situation Room. You had watch officers who weren't even on duty that day racing towards the White House, even though they knew it was a target. And remember, in the hours after the 2 planes hit, there were several other planes up in the air, and those in the White House believed that the White House was one of the targets. So they ordered the evacuation of the White House. They ordered an evacuation of the Situation Room. The director calls down and says, "You guys got to go." They looked up, kept working. Called back 20 minutes later, "You guys have got to go." They kept working. Finally, he calls down a third time, and a gentleman named Rob Hargis says, "Listen, you just don't get it. We're not leaving. We are not going." So he says, "Okay." And they handed out a 3x5 card to everybody in the room and said, "Write your name and your social security number." That would be the kill list, the people who had died in the Situation Room, if indeed the worst happened that day.
And even the chefs wouldn't go, right? They need to eat.
The Situation Room is right next to the White House mess, and it's run, the White House mess is actually run by the Navy. And just as Ed Padinsky, a naval officer who I talked to, who served that day in the Situation Room, told me, "This is where we fight from," the commander of the Navy mess said exactly the same thing. "You guys have to eat. We're not leaving either."
In a striking contrast would be former President Trump's interaction with the Situation Room. You actually have a couple of stories in there, not just about the Situation Room. One where he's on the phone with one of his people who's in another country, who basically says, "We're not having this conversation." They're listening. Trump just continued to talk. But of course, also January 6th, he says he's on top of it. He's watching it. Your book says otherwise.
Mike Stiegler was the Situation Room duty officer that day during January 6th. He was the person on the phone with the Secret Service and others on Capitol Hill who told me the most harrowing part of that day was knowing how close we came to losing the vice president. While he's dealing with that and implementing continuity of government operations, the president is sitting up in his study in the Oval Office. He does not call down to the Situation Room once during that entire day, which is kind of unimaginable when you think about that. That's the job of the president, is to be in contact with the Situation Room, to deal with crises. The job of the Situation Room is to give him the information, but he didn't want it that day.
The Situation Room, it's not about making decisions. It's about supplying the president with information, because that's the person who's going to make these decisions. How did things go so wrong when it came to the departure from Afghanistan under President Biden?
They just didn't do the due diligence on making sure the security was in place at the Kabul airport. It's just now, to be fair, I think that they had anticipated that it's possible that the Afghan army would not last in the long haul. They didn't imagine it would collapse in a matter of 24 hours, but the Biden administration did put those lessons to use as they were preparing for the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Just a quick question about Clinton. That's when you were there. What is your favorite memory, and maybe that's not the right word, but when you look back to those days tied to the Situation Room, what do you?
I just liked my daily interaction with the Situation Room. Because of the nature of my job was to brief the president often during the day. I was on the phone with the Situation Room many times during the day, especially first thing in the morning, where I would get whatever information came in overnight, brief the president, brief the correspondents who were doing their morning live shots from the front lawn, check in with them during the course of the day. And that's when I first encountered these duty officers who are just the heroes of my book. I mean, these apolitical people who come from all across the government to serve the presidency, and they do it in the best possible way.
The longer you're around, the more you realize just how older we're getting. And one of the things I loved in your book is that you're going around talking about the Situation Room, and you go to the White House and you find out, George, it ain't the Situation Room anymore.
I always called it the Situation Room, the sit room. And sometime, I mean, and when I went to last year, just as I was finishing the book last fall, people kept calling, and I was preparing a visit, and they said, so when are you going to visit the Whizzer? And I said, what's the Whizzer? And the acronym for the Situation Room is WHSR. So sometime, and we couldn't pinpoint exactly when it happened, but sometime either late in the George W. Bush administration or early in the Obama administration, all the cool kids started to call it Whizzer, and I guess it's stuck. I just can't do it. For me, it's always going to be the sit room.
Just finally, for people who want to know that that Situation Room looks like it does in the movies, it didn't, but now it does.
Now it does. It is just unbelievable. I had not been there since I left the White House in December 1996, and I finally went back last August, just before they revealed it to the world, and that was my first thought as I walked in. Wow. It now does look like the movies. It is the most impressive, high-tech place you'd ever want to visit. It's got, you know, the Watch Center has screens everywhere. They can get rid of all the classified information with the flick of a button. The walls can go opaque. It is now finally lives up to what people imagine it should be.
Just a fascinating book. Again, it's called The Situation Room, the inside story of presidents in crisis. It is out now. And my thanks to the Chicago Humanities Festival and the Illinois Institute of Technology for hosting us. One more break. We're back with a look at the week ahead in a moment. Stay with us.